Therapists that have cried in a session, why? I was working with a deeply depressed client who had a lot of negative self-talk about how she was always a failure. We were exploring the origins of this and how young she was the first time she felt self-blame. She told me her earliest story of when she was in second grade. Afterwards, as we were processing it, I expressed that it wasn't your fault about the story. She just broke down sobbing and said nobody has ever said that to me before in between sobs. It hit me and I cried a little. My therapist cried while mediating a discussion between my mom and I. I have a neurodegenerative disease and she is my full-time caregiver. Because of my severe disability, she also has legal guardianship of me, even though I am in my 20s. This is all fine with me, I need the help, and I agreed in court to all of it. This was the first true disagreement that we ever had. I am ready to die. I am in pain, unable to do anything for myself, and it's only getting worse. I asked my mom to sign a do not resuscitate order, because I had been resuscitated before, it was a mess, and I don't want it to happen again. She refused. She doesn't want to lose her child and wanted to do everything medically possible to keep me alive. The session was essentially me begging her to let me go, while she sobbed and said she could never sign a paper that would lead to my death. It was a terrible situation. No one was the bad guy, no one was trying to hurt the other. It was someone wanting their suffering to end, versus a mother not wanting to lose her child. My therapist agreed that I should be allowed to make this choice, but certainly didn't think my mom was manipulative or evil, just already grieving and trying to hold on to me as long as possible. I saw her wipe her eyes several times, and they were red by the time we were done. She actually hugged us both at the end. The situation wasn't resolved during the session, but my mom came around shortly after. She wouldn't sign the DNR, but gave me legal permission to do so, in her mind, it wasn't her making the final decision. By the way, my mom and I have a great relationship. This was just one issue that we couldn't come to an agreement on ourselves. But it worked out, and I'm now in palliative care and have a great team looking after me, including my mom. I cried after I worked with a kid who described an emotionally difficult situation with a sibling. The kid's experience aligned very similarly to something I went through with my own sibling when I was the kid's age and I hadn't realized how much hurt I was carrying from the experience. Being a therapist sometimes means being confronted with things you didn't realize had such a strong impact on you. Luckily, I have a stellar therapist of my own that too can work through these moments with. I was doing a cognitive assessment for a girl. We were doing tests and at one point she started crying. She was unable to tell me why. She was fine just one moment before. I let her collect her thoughts, then she said softly, "I don't want to be more stupid than my friends." She wasn't actually, she was very bright, but she didn't know that she has dyslexia, dysorthography and dyscalculia. I realized that she went through 13 years of school without help. Her parents didn't want to do an assessment as they thought she was just lazy. I told her that she was very brave to decide to get help and things would get better after our assessment, and I felt tears in my eyes. I cried in a substance treatment group. A client's mom had reached out via email to me to say that her daughter died from an OD. She called during my group, so I chose to take the call and spoke with her briefly. I thought I could continue with the group. Ended up in tears instead. My patient cried and said, "There's nobody on this planet who loves me anymore." I cried when I left because I knew she was right. For context, she was 95, her husband and son had died, she had a personality disorder that made her behavior unbearable for her environment after her husband died, and every person still in her life were paid for to be around her. She died a few months after this conversation. At the time I worked with young adolescents, and this story has and always will stick with me. One day I had a few scheduled sessions that would be done on college grounds. I get through the day and prepare to leave. It's around 5 p.m. and as I'm walking to my car I notice a student just sitting at the bus stop. I walk by and say something like, "Bus running a bit late, huh?" And she replies with, I don't know." As I take a moment I notice a few flags. I say good day and introduce myself, show her my faculty pass and ask if I can take a seat. For like 5 minutes we're just sitting there silent. Then bam, I remember I had a little pack of Skittles and a Milky Way in my bag, and I whip those bad boys out and ask her which ones are better, Milky Way or Skittles? She says Skittles and I pass them to her while asking how her week's been, and she just starts to let it all out. It's around 6-ish now and I hint that we should contact a family member or friend to come and pick her up. We sit and I wait with her while we continue talking. As her ride arrives I ask her if she would ever like to talk again, and to my joy she does. I give her the appropriate contacts and say goodbye. I get to my car and I just have a good cry. 2 months later we've had a session once a week. The amount of sadness coming from this small thing. I was still quite fresh in the field, so I myself was still trying not to take things personal, but this was heavy. Dealing with miscarriage, sister passing, mother leaving and her boyfriend too, throw in all the pressure of end-of-year exams, it's enough for anyone to explode. It's the end of November and the end of our session. I walk her out and go back to my office, and there's a thick envelope on my coffee table. I open it up, and in the first paragraph I know it's a suicide note. I hesitate for a moment, but I notice the letter was really crinkled compared to the envelope, and as I read on, she's written the date at the end. I was able to backtrack my visiting dates to the college and found out it had been written within those few days I had met her. Behind that letter a freshly written one was left. Without going into further detail, it was just her mentioning a few things, expressing her appreciation with a Skittles smiley face saying, "Skittles are still better." After that we had a few more sessions, but eventually parted ways by mid-December as she felt like she could move on with her life. It a lovely sight seeing the burdens that weigh us down slide off people's shoulders. I still kept in touch with her for a while, and even with her father even to this day. Sadly, she passed away in 2018. I was talking about self-worth and how my loved ones talked to me for my entire life, including early childhood. Talked about specific things that I won't get into, but included being called stupid and idiot almost constantly, being treated like a failure and weak because of my very severe and very undiagnosed mood and mental health issues and trauma. Feeling like I would never amount to anything because no matter what, I got negative feedback and criticism anytime I did anything and tried to share something I was proud of. She waited for me to finish, because she knew how I would finish, but I know I'm an adult and it shouldn't get to me, and it's not a big deal. No. I want you to look at me right now. And I did, and she had fury and tears in her eyes. And I started to apologize for making her feel that way, and she cut me off again and said, "No, I want you to see this. I am angry for you, so angry, and angry that no one has told you this is wrong, or stopped it. I am angry because no one protected you when you needed it most, and still fail you in the most basic ways. I need you to see that this is something people should be angry for." It hit me really hard and stuck with me. I think of it when I question my worth or try to downplay something serious that's happened or is happening to me. I was a high school teacher and was called to counsel so many times. One time one of my 13-year-old female students was sexually assaulted by an adult male the night before, and her friend told me. I had to call the police as mandated reporter, and the school called Mom. Mom showed up and basically told her daughter she was a slut, this was her very first sexual experience, and abandoned her. I went with her to the police station to file the report, and was in the room for the physical exam. They don't teach you these things in teacher school. My heart broke for her, and I was a mess that night and day after. How could a parent do that to a child? I had a student attempt suicide by taking a bottle of her brother's medicine and then get on the bus for school. By the time she got to school, we knew something was wrong and called 911. 9 hours later, I went to the hospital to visit her, and the nurse sitting in her room asked me if I was her mother because her mother hadn't shown up yet. She was in 3rd grade. Had a sweet little boy tell me about the death of his dad, who was his little league coach, tragically died the week of the big championship game. He went ahead and played the game the day before the funeral. He hit a home run and shared tearfully how the next day, he put the baseball in his dad's coffin at the funeral, with his team all standing around him in support. I've gotten misty-eyed a number of times, but only outright had tears fall once. My client was very vividly describing the week her newborn daughter spent in the NICU, ending with the day that they knew she would pass. She told me what it was like to hold her baby as she died in her arms. The feeling of grief that filled the air was just too much for me to hold in, so of course a few quiet tears rolled out of my eyes. I've usually cried after sessions if a client has shared some trauma or life experiences that have set them up for a difficult life or feelings of unworthiness. In session, I have cried more when clients share big successes or are graduating from services because they've met goals and such. One example was when a client, who struggled with discussing their struggles with mental health due to peer perception at school, wrote about their pet passing away for a writing class. In the writing, they shared about how helpful their pet was in coping with their struggles and how losing them had been very difficult. They were so afraid to submit it BC it would be the first time they shared about their mental health outside of a handful of people. 6 months later they were on a stage sharing about the same struggles to an auditorium filled with strangers. I cried during both moments. Not during the session, but I wanted to. I had a teenage client who asked me to listen to their life story as part of the 12-step program they were in. They didn't want me to correct the grammar, just to tell them if it made sense. It started off with the first time I did drugs. I was 9 years old when my mom and her boyfriend injected me with black tar heroin. I listened patiently, and as soon as we were finished and they left, I cried bitter tears at how cruel people can be. I heard years later that the client was doing terribly, was a prostitute, and a heavy drug user. Sometimes this field is like staring into the abyss of human suffering. Client who lost her husband talking about how due to a miscommunication at the hospital she thought she'd have time to say goodbye before he passed away after being taken off the ventilator. But when she came back into the room, he had died and she wasn't there for him dying. Everyone got to say goodbye except her. She loved him so much and it totally broke my heart. I originally started seeing my therapist so I could start making changes to the negative thought patterns and habits I had ignored for years. Shortly after I started with her, my partner was diagnosed with a rare cancer. She was there for the lengthy diagnosis journey, and when I had to tell her yes, it is cancer, I could see tears well up in her eyes. I'm not sure if it brought up feelings for her own personal experiences, or if it was because she felt just that emotionally invested in mine. She was very professional the entire time though. I made my therapist cry once and only once. We had been working together for 4 years. She learned about the drugs and gun violence during my upbringing, the many friends who were murdered to gun violence, my absent parents, the dad who was heavy-handed when he was around, the struggles in school, and traumatic brain injury, but never once shed a tear. She helped me sort out my depression, anxiety, and to think more confidently. She was wonderful. And with her hard work and my new psychiatrist, we cut out the depression and anxiety meds and switched to Adderall. We learned I have had ADHD my entire life, and my upbringing made it hard to diagnose. A lot of the symptoms overlap with ADHD and childhood trauma for those who grew up in rough neighborhoods like myself. She cried when I told her that Adderall changed my life. She was sad it took 4 years to figure it out and apologized for not seeing it sooner. But I wouldn't change it. She helped me realize my life was not the norm and I didn't need to continue to suffer from my past experiences. She is still helping me to this day, and I'm a lot better because of everything she did, not just the ADHD diagnosis.